and there's a statistic out there that says 85% of your effectiveness as a business person or a human being is your communication skills. So initially, I used to kind of doubt those types of statistics. I firmly believe it now. And I really think that you can really supplement those amazing technical and accounting skills that you have by having great communication skills. So I got to the manager level, and essentially what I was told is I lacked presence in meetings, right? So I was told, hey, you've got great skill set from a technical standpoint. We see a ton of potential in you, but when it comes to meetings with very senior stakeholders, you seem to be very quiet in the room and you don't provide your perspective. And so what that company did was, and this was Kraft Foods, where I actually spent 15 years, and I really credit the approach that they used to helping me round out my skill set, is they basically put me on these committees to say, look, for example, you're going to help organize an offsite with 150 people, and you're going to do the introductions, right? Just simple things like that, but it did throw me out of my comfort zone. I think one thing that's really important is creating almost a framework for individuals who want to improve, right? So the framework I started using in my training session is ACE your communication, right? So I use those three letters, ACE. And A is really about your audience. Their head coach, John Herdman, who led the Canada women's team, who did phenomenal things, is now at the helm. And he actually had a mock-up, I think, of the Toronto Star or something like that, saying Canada makes a World Cup 4 years ago. And he instilled belief, and he instilled those little habits in people, right? And again, public speaking, communication is little habits you build over time.
Hi, I'm Pascal D'Souza, the VP of Business Development at Top of Mind, and here's another episode of What's on Your Mind. Today's guest, lucky to have Ron Monteiro, a business consultant, speaker, and coach. Ron truly has a great wealth of accounting and business experience. He spent over 20 years in the industry and most recently held senior roles at such companies as Kraft, Campbell's, and Kruger. So without further ado, thank you, Ron, for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, Pascal.
Ron, we'll start with a couple of questions that hopefully you can answer and provide some insight to our guests in terms of communication. Accounting professionals often possess the insight and in-depth knowledge, but don't have the confidence to speak up. What are the top two exercises or practices that you would recommend that they adopt in their day-to-day life to develop confidence to speak?
Yeah, Pascal, I think that's a really good question. I just reflect back to my own experience. So when I first started in business, I remember many meetings where I thought I had great ideas, I had insights, and I wanted to provide it, but I lacked the confidence. And so to answer your question, one of the things I did, I literally had an agreement with my manager to speak at least once in a meeting, right? So just a simple thing to say, look, there's lots of meetings that slipped by and I didn't say what was on my mind. And I had a 360 view of the business, right? Like I did the analysis. I was very comfortable with what I had to say. I just didn't have the confidence to vocalize it. So in every single meeting, believe it or not, and some meetings I would just start by, hey, first opportunity, just put out the comments, right? But what's really interesting is you start building the confidence, right? You talked about competence and confidence as we started. That's one of the things I did. And then the second thing that, I provide a lot of advice to people who are going through the same journey is, for example, join Toastmasters. Join something where you get practice, because just like any other skill set, I really firmly believe it's about the reps you put in. It's about the practice that you put in. And it's one step at a time. We're not all going to be Obama in the first, iteration. It's going to be take that time, improve a little bit at a time.
I think you're absolutely right. So thanks for sharing that. Number two, we always hear that communication is integral in our work life as accountants. But is it actually? Can you provide a brief example that you believe best illustrates how important that is, Ron?
Yeah, 100%. And so this is, again, when I go back to my career, sometimes us in finance and accounting, we fall in love with our technical skills, right? We've got the competence. And I used to think that the technical skills were paramount, and they still are very important, but I now consider them table stakes. So to answer your question, I do a lot of reading, and there's a statistic out there that says 85% of your effectiveness as a business person or a human being is your communication skills. So initially, I used to kind of doubt those types of statistics. I firmly believe it now. And I really think that you can really supplement those amazing technical and accounting skills that you have by having great communication skills, because it is all about, hey, how do I move the business forward? How do I avert risks? How do I bring opportunities to the table? And so a simple example for you, I was working at a company, and this was, a lot senior. I was VP of finance for that particular company, and another company, customer came in, and I had, this point on my mind to say, look, we actually need to go back to them and renegotiate a contract. And earlier on in my career, I probably wouldn't have said anything. But in this particular case, I built up enough experience to say, look, here's what we need to do. And we actually renegotiated the contract, right? So I rewind to back in my earlier days, I probably wouldn't have had the confidence to do that. And it actually led to a significantly different outcome for that particular business. But it doesn't all have to be on those scales. It could be within your business team, with your cross-functional partner. It's about that communication. So I truly believe that now. 85% of your effectiveness. That's pretty astounding.
Ron, once again, totally agree with you. It's funny, even in my career, earlier on, working for an accounting firm, etc., presenting the numbers. But then towards the second half of my career, I was more of a stakeholder or someone that heard whether the auditor presented, etc. And I remember hearing a tax presentation, and like accountants, they're great with their numbers. Like they know the information. They're great with numbers, and what I've learned is a lot of people are not good with numbers. Accountants are excellent with numbers, but the communication of what that means to your stakeholder is critical, and that's where I think, unfortunately, and I'm sure many other careers are like that, where communication wasn't the strongest point for a lot of accounting professionals, unfortunately. And so, you said the number was 85%, which is wow. It doesn't surprise me at all that you said that, because I believe that is true. And so thank you for sharing that example. Question 3. What is more challenging in your opinion? Communicating up the chain of command or communicating down the chain of command in a professional setting, such as an accounting department? Can you provide any tips on how to deal with these issues? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm actually going to avert your question. I think I'm going to say both, because I've been in certain situations where, there's been really good, call it top-down communication. And there is, my last company, actually, there's a little bit of a fear to provide feedback up the chain, right? So it's really, really important for people at all levels of the organization to learn to communicate. And I did have this one situation where I was leading a team, and I used to have folks on my team who would come to me and say, look, we need to communicate to the cross-functional team. We need to talk to the marketing person. We need to talk to the salesperson. I truly appreciate it, because it was a bit of a blind spot. So I think, folks who are maybe junior, who have things on their mind, really, really important to communicate. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I had in that same company, what was really interesting is we had these really busy forecasts and month ends, and there's a lot of information provided from lower parts of the organization to senior people for presentations, right? The presentations would happen and there wouldn't be that communication backwards. So again, what was really important was for those leaders to then come back and say, hey, let's take a half an hour, go through the presentation, let's understand what the feedback was. And so for me, I think this is a missing piece in a lot of departments. And so I would say both. And I'd say no matter where you are in your career and in the organization, that communication piece is absolutely critical.
Ron, it's funny. I completely agree with you. I think both are important for obvious reasons, and I think you explained it well. I think just like you said, sometimes communicating up the chain of command is a bit intimidating for a lot of people. And again, like you said, with accounting professionals and sometimes have that fear just naturally in their personality, that it becomes tough to do that. But you've got to learn to do that effectively and properly. And then just in terms of doing it down, I think it should be done in a respectful way. I find a lot of individuals sometimes communicate down in a negative way, as opposed to try to build up your team and your colleagues. And that's what I would say on that front. But thanks for sharing your experiences and tips. That was super helpful.
Yeah, Paco, maybe one build on that is, some of the teaching I do is we actually talk about a 6-to-1 ratio of positive to constructive feedback. And I think back to my accounting days in my finance department, the recognition doesn't flow naturally in a lot of accounting departments. Maybe it's back to, introverts and, hey, we're just going to roll up our sleeves and get the work done. This was something that really helped me unleash my ability to provide it, because when I first heard about that statistic, I actually started recognizing people in the moment. Hey, Pascal, you're doing a fantastic job in this interview, right? I mean, as opposed to, hey, let's wait for the big accomplishment, big forecast, contract win. It's like provide that recognition. And both ways. Again, I love your question around, is it just managers to their individuals reporting to them, or is it both ways? And I really feel that communication practice can be even, hey, how do you communicate with your manager? How do you communicate with a leader? And so it's a real skill set that you can practice over time.
That's awesome. I wish I talked to you earlier when I dealt with my kids. I used to do I did the 3-to-1 ratio. So obviously I was a bit off. It should have been 6-to-1. Maybe they would have listened to me then, but that's awesome. Ron, can you give a word of advice to companies or firms who want to hire an accounting professional, but they may not have strong communication skills, just like what we said? What should they do?
Yeah, so let me give you a very specific example from my career. So I got to the manager level, and essentially what I was told is I lacked presence in meetings, right? So I was told, hey, you've got great skill set from a technical standpoint. We see a ton of potential in you, but when it comes to meetings with very senior stakeholders, you seem to be very quiet in the room and you don't provide your perspective. And so what that company did was, and this was Kraft Foods, where I actually spent 15 years, and I really credit the approach that they used to helping me round out my skill set, is they basically put me on these committees to say, look, for example, you're going to help organize an offsite with 150 people, and you're going to do the introductions, right? Just simple things like that. But it did throw me out of my comfort zone. Trust me, I wasn't happy. And the first couple of times I did it, I was kind of very nervous and had those feelings that you typically have when you're nervous. But now I absolutely have no problems with it. So I think what I would say is, for those organizations, it's really, really important to create that forum where people feel the development is important, and you actually provide that development. So it could be sending them out for external courses, it could be internal courses, and simple things like, hey, if you're having a meeting with a senior person, bring them along, have them present one aspect of that presentation, and coach them in advance, right? Just don't throw them out into the deep end and let them sink or swim. It's about, hey, how do you provide real good coaching to do that? And again, it's having that growth mindset, right? To say it is possible to develop and helping them along.
Excellent again, Ron. And a couple of things that I get from your thing is getting out of your comfort zone. People always use that term, but I think you're absolutely right. Like, you've got to get out of your comfort zone. And it's really tough. Like, people make it sound easy, but it's not. And I think what you said there is the growth mindset. Like, if you have the mindset that you want to grow and develop, that's what you have to do, unfortunately. I remember earlier years in my career too, you've got to get out of your comfort zone. And that's where you grow the most and hopefully develop the most, and then grow your career. Thank you very much for sharing.
Fantastic.
So now, something I love to talk to you about, Ron, we know that you love soccer. And I have to say this, that, one of the best soccer players I've ever played with was Ron Monteiro. Very modest guy, but the guy is one of the best I've ever seen play. And maybe because he always practiced, as he's emphasizing in today's interview. And we understand that you coach your rep soccer team in your local city. Is there a sports analogy that you can provide where individual communication and team communication was critical for success?
Yeah, and Pascal, just to hit on one of the things you talked about, right? So obviously I'm not one of the best soccer players, but I've played a lot, right? And part of the reason I have gained competence, similar kind of theme around, hey, how do you develop confidence and competence, is I grew up in Kenya and I played soccer all the time, right? And so once I came to Canada, I had a significant advantage, because if you think about, for example, the 10,000 hour rule or things like that to build confidence, I had done that, right? So really, really important. And then the analogy is it's a perfect time for this conversation. So if I was to ask you, Pascal, so Canada in 2014, the men's national team, where do you think they were ranked? Just throw it in.
I might be a bit biased, but 120.
Yeah, you're almost bang on, 113.
Oh, really?
And I think they're now up to 33. But if you understand what's happened over the last, call it 6 years or 4 years or whatever, their head coach John Herdman, who led the Canada team, the Canada women's team, who did phenomenal things, is now at the helm. And he actually had a mock-up, I think, of the Toronto Star or something like that, saying Canada makes a World Cup 4 years ago. And he instilled belief, and he instilled those little habits in people, right? And again, public speaking, communication is little habits you build over time. And one of the books I'm reading right now, it's called Atomic Habits. It really talks about taking those one step at a time to get to confidence, competence. And so you can peel back any sports analogy and compare it really closely to a business analogy or a team analogy. And I think there's such significant parallels. I was watching Liverpool and Man City yesterday. Why are they at the top? Yes, they've got phenomenal players, but they've got phenomenal coaches who really encourage that team to shine, right? Every single person on that team plays above their skill level. And if you peel this back to an accounting team or a finance team, you talked about, we have the numbers. If you don't communicate those numbers effectively, you're actually holding back your business, yourself, your team. So I would directly correlate sports analogies to business analogies and saying, hey, it's putting that work in, practicing, pushing out of your comfort zone to get you to that place.
I absolutely agree that, team sports analogies and the teamwork, etc., are hand in hand. I'm a big believer, like you, Ron, in team sports. And obviously soccer is a good example, but just the ability to communicate, to work with a team in sports just translates very well in real life experience at any job opportunity. I've generally worked with a team environment where you have strong players and weaker players and different, and not weaker, stronger and weaker in different sets of skills, and you kind of work together to achieve whatever goals and accomplishments you're trying to achieve. I think it's critical in sports as well as in business. Ron, is there anything else you want to add to communication skills that you think we kind of missed today?
Yeah, Pascal, I think one thing that's really important is creating almost a framework for individuals who want to improve, right? So the framework I started using in my training sessions is ACE your communication, right? So I use those three letters, ACE. And A is really about your audience, right? So let me give you an example. So Pascal, I know you very well. If I was doing a presentation for you, I would keep it brief, 1 or 2 slides, and hit the points pretty fast. I would not have a long, drawn-out 30-page presentation because I know you, right? I think you'd get pretty bored a few pages in and you'd almost check out, right? Whereas I know other people who you need that very long presentation, and actually real stakeholders back to back where I used to use either 1-pager or a 20 to 30-page deck. So important to really understand your audience. How competent are they financially? And there's so many other questions you can ask, attention span, interest, all those things, and really cater to your audience. That's the first thing I always do, say I cater to my audience. The C stands for content, right? Which is insightful and interesting. Again, you never want to bore your stakeholders. For example, visualization. I talk to finance and accounting professionals and say, visualize your data when you're working with marketing and sales, right? So that's a small example. And then E, a lot of times finance and accounting forget the execution, right? So it's how do you vocalize it, the confidence, the body language, all those things. And there's actually a statistic which says, even if you're on an old school phone call with no video, people can unconsciously detect if you're smiling. So that body language that you bring forward is so important, even if you're on a video call, right? It's really, really important. So I always talk about audience, content, and execution. And I think it's just a nice framework to say we all have strengths, and you talked about that, and areas we can develop. Which one of those 3 components are you really going to hit hard in order to be a great storyteller and communicator?
Ron, I have to say, I kind of cheated a little bit. I have heard you say this before about ACE, and I thought it was excellent. It was a great acronym and absolutely right. In my early days, understanding your audience, your users, stakeholders, different terms, but that's something I've learned from university days. And so that's excellent. And then, of course, content and execution, absolutely critical. But yeah, that's a great acronym, and thank you for sharing. ACE, something simple to remember, but critical to your communication. Now, Ron, we have a special question for you that we'd like to wrap up the segment with. We truly believe we have to make work enjoyable and fun. And just like in this interview, we'd like to wrap up with one question for you. If you had to choose to never wear socks again or never wear shoes again, what would you pick?
Yeah, really, really good and deep question there, Pascal. But in all seriousness, I mean, I do a lot of teaching on high-performing teams, and having fun is one of the, a critical, element of having a successful team. So to answer your question really directly, I'm a soccer player, so I don't think people want to see my feet, so I'm going to keep my shoes on, but I'll ditch the socks.
Okay, well, I thought about this question too, and I was thinking, I think that should be the standard question because you can't do much without shoes externally. So, but that makes sense, especially as a soccer player. So once again, thank you, Ron. Very insightful. Love to have you back for some more insights. And this segment has been brought to you by Top of Mind, innovative platform that can connect businesses and accounting professionals. Thank you for joining us and have a top-notch day. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.